Hi, welcome to 3 Script Points with Chop from Screenplay Prep. Today we are going to have a look at House of the Dragon from HBO. This is a prequel to HBO's Game of Thrones, and therefore the screenwriting and story has high standards to live up to. Perhaps we might ignore the final season of Game of Thrones. House of the Dragon tells a story of succession and the war therein within the House of Targaryen. This is 172 years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen. So ultimately what I want to be looking at here with these 3 script points upcoming is the relevance of writing a prequel or sequel to a show and how you get things to work and ensure that the audience maintains interest. With this 3 script points, we're going to be looking at these: familiarity, extremity, and legend. These all fit very well the whole Game of Thrones theme, so we're going to see how this continues to work in House of the Dragon. Start the timer, and here we go. Familiarity. Familiarity is a thing of comfort. So when embarking on a new season or series, to maintain familiarity is a key thing to get the audience involved and feeling comfortable, and that they already know something and are ready, therefore, to take on all the new aspects of the story and fresh characters. Ultimately, the familiarity allows the audience to acknowledge and make links to prior stories and characters. Right off the bat with House of the Dragon, the opening titles talk of the fact that this is 172 years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen. So we understand immediately that there is a familial link. In doing so, this sets the audience expectations in terms of what they might anticipate. So there is the scene towards the end of episode 1 where King Viserys announces to court that his daughter, the Princess Rhaenyra, is to be his heir. Members of the realm are in a position to then pledge fealty to the princess. In this scene, we then see members of families that are very familiar to us in Game of Thrones. This familiarity helps dovetail with Game of Thrones, so we know where we're going, but we don't know the story and path to get there, which is why we're still intrigued to see this. But it takes out a lot of doubt and expectation as what ultimately we are aiming at. Sometimes there's a benefit in storytelling in knowing where we're going, and then we can just enjoy the journey of how we get there and what happens along the way. Beyond establishing those story aspects, we've got familiarity in terms of location. So we immediately are aware of the fact that King's Landing is where we're back. The setup is slightly different. We've now got the dragon pit that doesn't exist later on because it was destroyed. But the familiarity of mentionings of the Watch, as well as Dawn. And then the poignant scene down in the dungeon where the king tells his daughter the story that has been handed down through the family of the secret which is engraved into this dagger that he holds of the story of ice and fire. With all of this being told, we know firmly where we are. Thus, familiarity brings in the audience. You can see familiarity at work in vampire stories, movies and TV shows, where typically you have the same rule set governing what vampires can and can't do, and adopted by all sorts of writers through different films and TV shows. But the point is that enables the audience to know where they stand, and then they don't have to worry what's the rule set and how unpredictable a thing's going to be. So in the same way with House of the Dragon, we're establishing a similar rule set and familiarity with Game of Thrones, so we know exactly where we are. Second script point, extremity. Extremity is something we came to know very much in Game of Thrones. A lot of TV shows like to nudge the barriers on what's acceptable these days. And ultimately, we're trying to maintain interest and make sure that we're moving the goalposts to sensitivities. We do get desensitized. And the disadvantage of this is that we push the boundaries each time to make sure that we can shock and enthrall. Extremity, and we hit this straight away in episode 1, where the king's brother Daemon Targaryen, who is now in charge of the Watch, runs riot through the city streets with his crew of soldiers. This is done to the excuse of squalor and that they feel they need to clean it up and restore law and order, and reminds us of the levels of sex and violence in the themes that the show goes. From a story perspective, these extreme scenes also establish Daemon Targaryen, the king's brother, and show his impunity and potential ambition for the throne, and his relationship with his naive brother, the king. Extremity is something we see a lot of in movies and TV shows these days, and once frowned upon, it's almost expected, it's almost staple, where we're hungry for more. So this show certainly keeps up that, as expected from Game of Thrones, and naturally embraces the built-in audience. If you were embarking on your own prequel or sequel, to have a prior series that does take to an extreme level, to not live up to that would be a big mistake, because it is going to be expected. Finally, we're going to look at legend. In a world where we share so much information through social platforms, and therefore the sense of reality is spread amongst all, it's fantastic to be able to disappear into a fresh world through something like House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, Star Wars, and whatever. Fantasy and legend are a great way of using story to give us something new and fresh, something that which we haven't seen before, and perhaps is not something that is historically accurate, but more fantastical. Here we're full of legend, as we were in Game of Thrones, with more scenes of dragons than we had before. There are more dragons alive, 172 years before Game of Thrones. And we have all of the pointers towards the realms and kingdoms across the sea, and a lot of this is reflected in the architecture, as King's Landing is in a fresher state than we see later on. The aspect of legend is really pushed when King Viserys is in the dungeon with his daughter, the princess, and talks of the dragon dreams. These are prophetic dreams. He foretells the coming of the White Walkers from the north and the long winter. The stuff of legend is very much alive in the House of Dragon, whether it's creatures and historical kings and heroes, or whether it's those creatures yet to come. I hope that was a useful look at 3 script points from House of the Dragon, and I look forward to seeing you in the next 3 script points video. Thank you for watching. If you've written your screenplay and need to have it polished to pass through the scrutiny of the industry reader, then join my clients for the formatting and basic editorial package to eliminate issues with your screenwriting conventions and standards. I offer a personal and considered service, as I do not farm out to contractors. Link is in the description below.